to a tech moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's shaping and transforming the cannabis and hemp industries. And then once a month, we check in with PanXchange to kind of keep our thumb on the pulse of the hemp markets reports and what's going on there with the hemp industry. Now, this month, I'm welcoming Seth Boone, who is the new VP of Business Development for PanXchange. He helps ensure that their platform and analysis meet a rapidly evolving hemp industry's needs and develop new opportunities in the emerging agricultural markets. Raised on a ranch in West Texas, he offers a background that begins with production ag, merchandising feed grains, and other ag commodities for StoneX and JBS. Holding a master's degree in agricultural economics from Purdue University, Seth is absolutely passionate about the emerging commodity markets growth and future. So welcome to the show, Seth. We're excited to have you on board.
It's great to be here. I look forward to this, and this is actually my first one of these. I'm a little nervous, but ready to get started.
Fantastic, and I promise you it's going to be completely painless. We're going to have a good time with the conversation today. Now, after I read the report this month, the first thing that I really wanted to talk about, and this is really kind of on the tips of the tongues of everybody, I think, in the hemp industry right now, and that's supply and demand. I mean, clearly, as we sit today, we have way more supply than we have in demand so far. So I would really love to hear your or PanXchange's kind of predictions in hemp acreage for 2021 and in CBD production. And how did you kind of come to that number?
That's actually, it's a monumental problem for the industry as a whole. There's not much data to really go off of, and then the data that is available doesn't tell you quite a bit about it. I guess a good example would be licensing is the best data that we have available at the time. But it really doesn't tell you anything about the acres that are actually planted. Like a lot of states allow you to license up to a maximum amount of acres, and if you have a total of 1,000 acres, even if you're going to plant one, you might register all of them if it's a flat price. So there's tons of variables within that data that doesn't really provide much for us. So what we wanted to look at was find a short-term variable that we could pair back into a number that's really useful. And so what we did was we took a different approach and used the retail estimates from Statista, Nielsen, Brightfield, and paired that back into the actual acres that are demanded. And if you've seen our December report, we originally estimated that as being like 1,100 to 2,800 acres for 2020. We've since updated all of our assumptions. That includes like retail prices that we've pulled online. And we've also found that processors have actually increased their efficiency quite a bit, especially with the oversupply issue, really pinching them down into an efficiency. And we've also seen yields have gotten better, and farmers are much better at not defaulting at the 0.03. And that's only going to get better as we go along. So with 2021, even though that there's a rise in retail estimates, for example, Nielsen went from 1.85 billion in 2020 to 3.5. That's a huge increase. But even with that, like that range didn't change terribly much. Like we're still sitting at a 1,600 to 3,200 acre demand. And that is with pretty generous default rates on being above the THC threshold and actually fairly conservative processor yields as well. But to expand on that, it's very easy to break that 3,200 or 3,500 acres. There's still plenty of intrigue that we've seen from the rest of the market. And especially with new participants wanting to look and say, like, is now a good time to grow hemp? So if you force me into actually putting out a guesstimate, like we went from 120,000 in 19 to 42,000 planted for solely CBD from the latest FSA data. I would say we'd more than likely be somewhere between 10 to 20,000 acres there. And that would still suggest an oversupply, but from what we've seen, there could be potential for exports or even Delta 8 to chew up some of that oversupply.
Yeah, we will absolutely touch base on that Delta 8 thing, because I know that that's definitely a hot topic right now within the hemp market. But in terms of the products that PanXchange covers, and that's one of the things that I love about the PanXchange report, is just kind of how everything is broken down, from distillates to broad spectrum, smokable flowers. Now we're starting to talk about this Delta 8. Kind of where do you think the most potential lies for hemp producers at this point, based on what you've seen in the commodities markets thus far?
Um, well, let's leave Delta 8 out of it right now. It's such a big unknown. There's so many variables that could play into that. I'll stick with the mainstream CBD markets. And honestly, I think the largest potential is isolate. It's the most versatile, and with all the different variables that could easily shake the market and change it, isolate is by far the safest and easiest thing to reapply elsewhere. I guess a good example would be like if marijuana or THC was legalized and regulated in an appropriate way, you could see isolates of CBD, CBG get isomered into and solve certain pain points that might be in these other cannabinoid markets. So overall, I would say isolate is the safest bet. Broad spectrum would probably be another one, just because how it could move across state lines much easier. But short term, I still think smokable flower has a lot of potential to get rid of biomass that's still sitting on the market, especially if it's of a smokable flower quality.
Right. And I love personally, I think it's great to see the smokable hemp market doing as well as it is. I have seen several different products here over the last several months, and it appears that the quality for smokable hemp flower is really improving. I actually am part of the Cannabis Cup hemp judging this year, and that kit that I got from High Times had several smokable hemp samples in it. So I'm looking forward to judging those and trying them out. I'm really enthusiastic about the whole smokable hemp thing. I think that's a great angle for the consumable hemp side to take. But I do want to talk about Delta 8, because this is in this month's report. Julie and I talked about it a little bit last month. It just based on my own LinkedIn account and chatter that I've heard within the industry, it seems like this is a super controversial topic, obviously for several reasons. The proponents think that, Delta 8 could be the saving grace for this overabundance of CBD that we have right now. But then there's opponents both inside and outside the industry that are a little hesitant to jump on the Delta 8 train because of the fact that, number one, they're man-made cannabinoids. They're not naturally extracted. And now I've even heard, I think West Virginia was one place, and maybe even Texas has now, their poison control centers have started to issue warnings because of the intoxicating effects of Delta 8 THC from hemp. So, here we have this product that's virtually unregulated, causing intoxicating effects in products that are being sold in a legal market. So it's really, really interesting for me to see how this is all kind of playing out. What is the DEA going to do, and what are those final rulings really going to play into this in the long term? So I'd love to hear your perspective and kind of PanXchange's, we'll call it crystal ball into the future, and what's happening with Delta 8 right now.
So currently, Delta 8 is in a huge unknown point. Like right now, it's extremely unregulated, and that leaves the door open for a lot of negative things that could result in an overregulated CBD industry. Like, for example, if someone was to get ill from a lower quality Delta 8 that isn't being produced from a highly quality controlled lab, you're going to see regulation come down even harder on vaping products, and then anything that's synthetically derived, and then also people who can access bulk quantities of CBD who might actually need that level of CBD in their own needs. So ultimately, it's kind of like a speed limit thing. If something bad happens that justifies like a health industry to like the health association to come in and overregulate this industry, it's going to happen. But on the bright side of that, I think Delta 8 has a lot of potential as a cannabinoid in general. Ultimately, I believe Delta 8 has huge potential in the cannabinoid space. The effects from it are genuinely, I think, in demand from the market right now. There are plenty of people not looking for a Delta 9 material, and they're also looking for the medicinal benefits of it. The future for Delta 8 is uncertain. Delta 8 as a whole and on paper, it's great. The medicinal benefits from it are in demand right now, and it could serve a great benefit to our society and population, and would just add another use for hemp as a whole. But the other side of that sword is if something bad were to happen, if someone wasn't necessarily as responsible as they need to be, they could really wreck what's the good thing that's going on right now. So ultimately, I really think all processors need to focus on getting into a very viable and safe Delta 8 product and to something that we could eventually leverage into a workable regulation with the FDA, DEA, and everyone else. If we can't prove that we could do it as a private industry, they're not going to let us do it down the road. Um, and I think there is incentive. I think the consumer base, they want a safe and legitimate product, and there's plenty of processors who are working day and night to make that happen. I think as soon as the first lab can prove that they can have a safe Delta 8 product that fits Poison Control Center's criteria, I think Delta 8 has a very healthy future, especially and even when marijuana or THC is legalized.
Right. And that's a great point that I really would love to emphasize is the fact that it's not necessarily the cannabinoid itself that's causing the controversy in the industry. I think everyone pretty much agrees that the cannabinoid does hold some potential. A lot of consumers are reporting that they prefer the lighter effects of the Delta 8 versus Delta 9, and I completely understand that. My biggest concern is very, very similar to, the early days in the cannabis industry with cannabis concentrates and such. And, in Denver, there was a big crackdown because a lot of the concentrates tested positive for pesticides and contaminants, and there were carcinogens and things that were found in a lot of those concentrates. And it was, part of the process was figuring out what to look for and how to test for those contaminants to make those products safer. And I believe that Delta 8 has that potential as well. But you're right, we have to make sure that the people or the companies that are producing these products are producing them in a way that is safe and limits the amount of contaminants and toxins that could be in these products. And I would absolutely hate to be that company that flips that switch and triggers that crackdown. And I hadn't even thought about it. You had mentioned in your description there that the bulk CBD buyers could see some impact from this if something does go wrong. And I had never considered that would make it harder for producers to get that CBD isolate if something does happen with one of the products for Delta 8 and all of that. So it's really interesting to think about it from that perspective. And, I wouldn't want to be that company. I guess I just wouldn't want to be the company that kind of, leaves that mark on an industry that's struggling to gain acceptance as it is. So it's good to hear your perspective on Delta 8 and just kind of the process in general. I think it's going to be very interesting over this next few months as we, like you said, we start to hear more regulation and see more of where this is going. But now I want to switch gears a little bit and let's talk about the other side of the hemp industry. So obviously there is still the industrial side of hemp, and that has nothing to do with any kind of human consumables or CBD extracts. Do you want to talk about the industrial side of hemp? And then PanXchange just has an announcement here recently regarding a new trading platform for these products. Do you want to touch base on that a little bit and tell us what that's about?
Yeah, I'll start with what we're seeing in the industrial hemp side, and then move on kind of like what PanXchange is doing in regards to that. Um, but right now in industrial hemp, we're seeing quite a bit more attention this year, and there's actual, and as you've seen, like if you went to NOCO, there are more people doing things with hemp than there have been in the past. We're seeing more bioplastic interest. We're seeing building materials both develop as far as volume and the technology surrounding it. So industrial hemp is growing, and it's going to make huge leaps this year. Like as far as the United States, as far as textiles, we've leaped and bounded in getting very close to where we can start our own fiber production in the United States and not have to rely nearly as much on imports for textiles. And then on the grain side, the food industry is giving it a lot more attention as well. Seeing more demand for hemp oil, hemp hearts, everything is in those products. The big hole that's still left is feed. That will take some time. But like the Hemp Feed Coalition has done a great job. I love what they're doing. I support what they're doing as far as getting these things approved. And I agree. Once we get the first one done, it's going to be a windfall of other approvals for other animals. But right now, the most immediate demand that we're seeing is honestly in building materials and for like particle sized herd, and then also like micro sized materials going into bioplastic injection molding. And probably like that is the biggest source of demand that there is right now. It's just sort of connecting the dots because these buyers of these entry level materials, such as like a micro sized herd for bioplastics, cannot find a steady supply. It is hard for them to find a local and steady supply that can actually sustain them through the whole year. Like they can find spot purchases now here and now and then, but they're actually having to turn down sales contracts because they can't guarantee that they'll have the supply to support it. And kind of pairing back into what PanXchange is doing, we've always talked about this. We've always wanted to do this because the fiber and grain applications, be it with hemp, will dwarf the impact that the cannabinoid side will have, both in our society and market size, everything. There's 50,000 uses for them, and most of them don't involve cannabinoids. So what we are doing right now is we're getting ready to launch very initial products or commodities on the platform to help solve these points of pain that we're seeing from our industrial customers that we talk to, which is really just connecting the dots between supply and demand. And for example, in certain areas, we're actually seeing an oversupply of herd that they can't get rid of, but they can't find it in the spots where they're actually utilizing it. So our whole goal here is to actually help develop these standards and everything that goes into from what the buyers want and communicate that to the people that have the supply. So that way people can actually create a spot market for hemp herds and also like short bast fiber. All the other products are really undefined and still very much a project base. But we're ready to start and actually help mature and standardize herd market for both bioplastics and building materials.
That's fantastic. And I can't agree more. I really do believe that the industrial side of the hemp industry is what really has the most potential. And I look forward to seeing the infrastructure get built out so we can start using hemp more for these types of things. I just think there is an incredible amount of market potential, and like you said, environmental potential, the impact that it's going to have on us in the long run when we start to really utilize hemp and industrial hemp the way that it should is just incredible. I think there's unlimited potential there. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see everything kind of evolve. And obviously, we'll definitely be looking forward to what PanXchange is doing to help kind of close those gaps for producers and everything else there. So that's really super interesting. Seth, that brings us to the end of our podcast today. So thanks for joining us on A Tech Moment. We're looking forward to having you back again next month and talking about more. But before we leave, do you want to tell our audience how they can get the monthly PanXchange hemp market report as well?
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, you can contact me through our main line that's on our website. And also, you can subscribe directly on our website, which is panexchange.com, PanXchange.com. And all you'd have to do is click on the hemp benchmarks and analysis reports, and you would have a link to register for the subscription. And each month, we typically cover the entire. We could cover the cannabinoid market and getting more and more involved on fiber and grain, and always have relevant topics listed there as well, and as well as 12 benchmark prices as well.
Fantastic. Seth, it's been great meeting you here today, and we look forward, like I said, to having you back again next month and talking more about what's going on at the hemp market. So thanks again for your time, and have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too. Thank you very much, Christina.